I'm particularly interested in this idea of word of mouth. So if you have words and if you have a mouth, spread the word of this podcast. Thank you.
Hello and welcome to the Front Lounge with KONGOS. This week it is just KONGOS. We were thinking of doing some imaginary characters, but we can't pull that off. So let's go to breaking news. Sweet potatoes are not that bad. I was having this discussion with Johnny. The rest of you can weigh in. I know we have a bias against sweet potatoes because they're just a bad replacement for fries when they do them as fries.
When you and I were talking
really
about
like
it, what did we say? That you can either have a great squash experience, like if you think of a potato like a squash or something, or you can have a bad potato experience. So you have to just change the way you think about it. If you're trying to substitute for a real potato with a sweet potato, it's going to be disappointing.
Mm-hmm. I've been steaming them lately, just making like a mash thing, but you put lots of salt on it. It's nice. I don't like when they overly sweet them, like Thanksgiving type stuff.
Yeah, they've been kind of fucked up for a long time, I feel like, because they're already sweet. They're called sweet potatoes. And then, like, the traditional way of making them for Thanksgiving and stuff is with sugar
candy
and marshmallows and everything else. It's, like, in the middle of a meal. That just doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, it's never quite made sense to me. But the substitution part is what finally liberated me and allowed me to enjoy them. Yeah, basically, you just don't get them if you want fries.
People love them, you know.
I know, but they don't count as...
It's not a real fry. I mean, I don't just call it something else, you know.
Well, yeah, I don't mind them if I just know that they're not interfering with a fry.
Yeah, it's purely a psychological thing.
Yeah.
If you want potatoes, get real potatoes. Otherwise, you're severely disappointed. Yeah, why don't we talk about this? Because you brought up Thanksgiving food and
what we do for our
Thanksgiving, because I know we'll probably get booted out of the country for this, but I hate almost everything at a traditional Thanksgiving dinner.
I like mashed potatoes.
That's true.
Yeah, you can't go wrong with.
Yeah, everything comes back to potatoes for us. At our Thanksgiving, we always do
curries. We curry every Thanksgiving dish. So I curry the mashed potatoes. Jesse, what do? You do some sort of like buy one bargain.
Well, Johnny makes these things called vegetable Manchurians, which is sort of a cross between Indian and a Chinese, you know, that sort of Himalayan region. It's kind of a deep fried sort of falafel kind of thing, but it's got ginger and soy sauce, and I make the sauce for that, and Johnny makes the Manchurians.
Yeah, you can get them a lot of times at Southern Indian restaurants for some reason. Even though they are, I think it's more related to what you're saying up in
We call them our Manchurian candidates because they sneak into Thanksgiving dinner and make it more interesting.
Basically, we do an East Indian feast for Thanksgiving.
We've probably talked about this guy. We'll post a link to him, Chef Va on YouTube. He's the best. That one summer we started making a bunch of curries. And he's got the best recipes.
I learned that trick from him about, I forget what the name of it is, but where you take whole spices, like pieces of cinnamon and cardamom and big chunky spices, and you put them in cheesecloth and you tie it up in like a little sack, and then you cook the sauce or the onions or the tomatoes or whatever with that, so that it basically infuses the spice, and then you don't actually have the solids from the spice in it. There's a name for it, but I tried it once. It's really cool.
Yeah, cinnamon in the oil, like a cinnamon stick, changed my life. I used to hate cinnamon because you can't...
All that whole spices, instead of using like cumin powder, just frying cumin seeds in the butter or ghee or oil beforehand makes this
you still use the powder later.
Yeah.
But not you. Yeah, you can cook them at high temperatures when they're the whole seed like that. Yeah, and cardamom. Christian Rollick, who was a guest, I think 2 ago or 1 ago, he was telling us about black cardamom, so we got to check out that spice. And also, if you want to try a nice cumin variety, check out black cumin or black seed. It doesn't taste like cumin. It's quite interesting.
Yeah, that's the first time.
Health-giving properties.
Supposedly, yeah. I've been putting it on my sweet potatoes. And yeah, so now I think
we should make a note here and just check off sweet potatoes. We've discussed that thoroughly enough for this podcast.
Right.
Don't come back to it.
Yeah.
Next week will be yams.
Yam. Isn't a sweet potato is a yam, isn't it?
Yeah, it's not a potato, I thought. It's like a squash variety or yam variety.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's what makes it not as good as a potato. All right. What do we really want to talk about?
Well, music only, what we've been up to in the studio. Well, maybe 2 segments to this, but yeah.
Yeah, so Mick, our front of house engineer, production manager, Scottish dude, we've had him on the podcast. He's out in LA with us as we start getting further along the process of making our record and helping speed along some of the mixing and processing part of the album. And that's kind of, it's a little bit in detail, might not interest you to hear this much detail, but the way we process each element of a song, it kind of shapes how it ends up being mixed, how the vocals treated, how the drums are treated, how the bass is treated, and all this stuff that you can do to it subsequent to recording, and that's kind of what we're diving into. It's some of us find it fun, some of us find it really boring, but there's enough of us to kind of get an opinion and move on from it.
Yeah, you're listening for such subtle differences that you lose perspective is what I find.
So having more than one person in the studio, because a lot of times it's just been me sitting there for hours, making minor tweaks on the treatment of a guitar part, and I'll sit there and go back and forth. Number one, it's like an optometrist, when you go in for an eye exam, do you like number 1, number 2? What's better, number 1 or number 2?
There's also 4 new pieces of gear that we've gotten since the last record that we've not used yet on processing and on the mixing.
So there's 20, 30 options of pieces of equipment that you can run the signal through, and not only the different pieces, but you can choose to run them in a different order and different sequence and parallel to each other. And so there's infinite options of how to treat something in it. And sometimes too much choice is debilitating, but having more than one person in the studio where everyone goes, oh, yeah, that's it. That sounds right. Or no, I don't like that. Or, finding some sort of consensus helps the thing kind of move along.
There's a lot of flowery adjectives used to describe bass drum sounds.
It's always like food, buttery. Yeah, I guess silky is not.
Well, we have that.
Food, but
we have that in common with Mick talking about food. We'll talk about potatoes for an hour with Mick, but in the studio, if we're talking about the guitar, he'll say something like, "I just like the weight that it adds. It's kind of heavy and kind of thick and syrupy too. So that works for me."
Yeah, I just needed to tickle my balls a little bit.
The other thing we were going to talk about in this music segment was a pianist that we all came across fairly recently, a Russian guy called Sviatoslav Richter.
He's old though, right? Old guy.
He's what?
He's not a new guy.
No, I'm saying we just came across him recently. He's, I think he was in the 50s and 60s was his kind of main recording period, maybe a little later also. So we'll put up some links to some of his playing. The stuff that I really, really like of his is his Ravel recordings of like Gaspard de la Nuit, and also obviously all the Russian recordings like Scriabin or Shostakovich and Prokofiev and that sort of stuff. But I just want to read a couple quotes that after I found them, I started reading about him, and this is what Dmitri Shostakovich says about him. He says, Richter is an extraordinary phenomenon. The enormity of his talent staggers and enraptures. All the phenomena of musical art are accessible to him. And when you listen to him play, that last line of that quote really kind of encaptures, is that a word? Encapsulates his playing, because he truly seems able to express, he's playing other people's music, but he's able to express it fully with no hindrance from his hands or his brain or any aspect of him. Sometimes you listen to people and you feel like they're getting in the way of themselves with either a deficiency in a certain technical aspect, or they're putting too much ego or like show-offiness into their playing, and he just seems to have the full palette of expressing what the composer wanted to say with no interference in it.
I think piano music in particular is a good way to sort of have that discussion, because these same pieces that have been around for sometimes hundreds of years, are played and interpreted by thousands of different piano players. So you get to hear a lot of different people's take on the same piece of music, and then sometimes there seems to be a consensus where everyone says, "Oh, that's what the composer intended. That's the definitive version," and that the ability for a performer to have access to those skills and be able to call on them in the moment and not be taken out of the emotional sort of intent behind it is no small thing. And I think piano's one of the best vehicles for that type of, I guess, nuance.
It's funny you say that Vladimir Horowitz is that guy, I think, particularly for Chopin. Like, he is considered to be the definitive interpreter of Chopin's music. And it's interesting, he said about Richter, he said, "Of the Russian pianists, I only like one, Richter." And, you know, to come from, it's literally like, I don't know, being anointed by the king when Vladimir Horowitz talks about you in that way, because he's also another absolute legend.
I've been a huge fan of Eric Satie's music since I was a kid, really. For some reason, just connected with me, and it's kind of influenced my composing.
Because you're a mopey Frenchman.
Yeah. Well, could be. You know, perhaps that was my past life. But we had different recordings of him growing up, and I couldn't remember which one was good. And now with Apple Music, you know, you can go and search and find a million versions. So I just Googled, you know, who's the best interpreter of Satie, and there seemed to be a lot of consensus out there about this guy Pascal Rajai, and so I went and found his versions of it, and I think I agree. I mean, I really got into them. He's very, very interpretive. The time kind of floats. It's not.
Is he a French piano player?
I'm assuming with a name like Pascal Rajai.
Yeah, it's interesting sometimes how sometimes the best person to play Russian music is a Russian. And it brings up the question, like, why? You know, it's all written down. You can figure it out. You can listen.
Glenn Gould plays Bach.
Yeah.
But he's American. But he also, but he brings up this point you're talking about, which is interpretation, especially with stuff like Bach, where there was no demarking or whatever, you know. There was no
indication.
Sometimes it was just notes, and it was entirely up to the performer to interpret it. And so he had to basically infer what the intent of some guy 500 years ago was, or whatever the timing is. Don't quote me on history.
I'll just read one last quote. This is Richter himself on talking about his playing. He says, "I don't play for the audience, I play for myself. And if I derive any satisfaction from it, then the audience too is content." Which sounds maybe on the first listen like it's arrogant or something, but I think that's a really true statement, that if you're actually trying to make yourself happy, not in some egoistic way of like, look at me, how fast I can play, or this, that, or the other. If you're having joy, then that is conveyed to the audience, and the audience has the same experience through that.
It works for most things. Comedians can't just make themselves laugh. They have to make other people laugh.
Although sometimes when you see like that on that new Dave Chappelle special, when he actually cracks himself up,
right? Yeah,
you know, like sometimes that's a bit of an act, I think, with comedians to pretend that
that's
they're
the best
laughing.
part of Horatio Sands on SNL was when he couldn't contain his laughter. There was something I wanted to say though. You brought up egoless playing earlier, which I was watching footage of James Gadsden, this Bill Withers drummer. There, and like the old Grey Whistle Test, that BBC series they used to do where they do live performances. It was like the old Jules Holland, and man, that guy is amazing. He's one of the deepest pockets I've ever heard. Well,
you were playing that one recording of theirs, and you're saying how there was the lack of ego, and I think that sometimes you see in some of these older bands, and still in modern bands, that sometimes someone realizes or accepts or is happy just being a sideman.
But even Bill Withers was there was a
yeah, no, they all seemed like they were their own. They were sidemen to each other, and that's a big part of it. Whereas sometimes you see a band where obviously there's a star or there's someone lead out front, and you kind of expect that, and they've got to be the show business side of it. But then if you've got like a drummer or a bass player also showboating the whole time, it interferes with the whole thing. So I guess that's why you hear those stories about James Brown would be performing and he would hold up 5 fingers behind his back, and that meant he was docking the guitarist $5 from his pay or whatever
for mistakes.
Yeah, mistakes or screwing up.
Yeah, there's legendary stories. I haven't watched that documentary of him yet, but just he would fire his bands, you know, a couple times Every few years, he'd fire his band, and they'd be replaced with 17-year-olds who knew every part, just waiting in line.
Have you seen? There's a video of Miles Davis. I think it's with Herbie Hancock. They're playing with that quintet in the '60s, and Herbie Hancock starts playing something during Miles' solo. Miles plays a line, and then Herbie Hancock kind of answers and comps for him, and Miles just turns and looks at him like, "What the fuck are you doing?" Like, that was the worst chord I've ever heard in my life, and then just goes back to his playing.
It's kind of like that. Have you seen the Chuck Berry video with Yoko Ono and John Lennon?
Yeah.
That's a similar look.
That was like he saw Cloverfield monster coming.
Oh yeah, I won't even describe it. Just look up Chuck Berry, John Lennon, and Yoko Ono video.
Chuck Berry's reaction. Yeah,
Chuck
It's
Berry reaction.
it's kind of fun watching somebody took Bill Burr's, he did a rant about that on one of his podcasts, and then somebody took the audio and matched it up with the video of Chuck Berry. So you hear Bill Burr saying while it's happening with John and Yoko and Chuck Berry. It's it's really funny. It's on the YouTube.
We'll throw up a link.
Lots of YouTube links this week.
So for music business section, we want to talk about this company Yonder. And I've never been to a concert where they've been in effect. And basically what it is a company that is at the venue. They have these little bags that you get your phone locked in before you walk into the actual stage area. And you have to go out to the lobby to have a staff member unlock the bag for your phone if you want to take a call or send a text message in the lobby. And I know Dave Chappelle used it at his last couple of concerts or at the taping, and I believe Chris Rock did also. So comedians are starting to use it.
Chris Rock was doing it at like arenas.
Yeah. So it's interesting. I don't know. For myself, I would love it if we could do that. I don't think it's going to be something we are able to do just yet, but it would be really nice because it is basically annoying, and I say this, like, we appreciate the fact that everyone wants to see, like, Come With Me Now played, and they want to take a photo and have a memory or video of that, and we want to have a memory of it. But at the same time, when we play that song, it's almost like the energy's dead sometimes in the room because everyone's just filming, you know? And it's kind of annoying, basically.
Yeah, phones are a double-edged phone. I don't have a problem with it. I mean, it's up to the person doing the show. I think that's if they want phones or if they don't want phones, all good by me. What weirds me out is when people have a problem with a performer who's doing this. It's like you don't have to go to the show. It's not nobody's forcing you to go see Chris Rock. There was somebody complaining about it, and that's a bizarre reaction to have. It's like it's 1 hour out of your life or 2 hours out of your life. It's not. And this is what he wants for his set.
So technically, I guess we could look this up, but is it you have to put your phone off or on airplane mode, or is it just kill
you just put it in a pouch. I think you can.
It goes in a pouch, like, you know, at a retail store when the clothing has one of those things you can't take off without a special tool. So it gets closed like that. As far as the on-off situation, I don't know.
So what if it's on ring and you put it in there and it starts ringing and you can't get it to switch it off? And
I don't know how that works.
It'd be interesting to. I'm sure they've thought about that.
They probably tell you to put it on vibrate before you put it in the bag.
Yeah. They probably don't.
And it's not inside the building. It's kept at coat check or whatever. You know, it's like not inside the. They don't keep it in the actual.
No, I thought you get to keep the bag.
Yeah. You keep the bag with you.
Yeah, because it would be a hard sell to try and convince 2,500 people to leave their phones outside. But so you keep the bag with you when you go into the venue. It's just locked so that you can't.
Sorry, I wasn't listening. I was looking up the Yoko Ono video.
So anyway, I would imagine you start seeing a lot more venues making that available as a service for performers that want to institute that policy.
Maybe it might be cost prohibitive.
I don't know. I mean, Donald Glover was doing it at some of his.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I think venues will probably start supplying them, like they will buy.
Well, it's like stand-up or at Childish Gambino shows.
I think it was at the music, like at Childish Gambino shows.
The only thing I see is, you know, a part of it. I find it obviously annoying as a performer. It's annoying to look out and see cell phones, but you also rely on that these days for fucking Twitter and Instagram hashtags of the concert and get trending on this and that, you know. And so if you're an established artist and you sell your shows and you don't need any viral activity after each show, then it's probably awesome.
Yeah, I wonder if there's an actual balance in that, because let's say you've got 1,000 people at a show, 1,000 people just miscellaneously tweeting and sending out pictures, or you have 1,000 people that actually have a much broader, deeper experience of the show that then go tell more friends in a word of mouth. Like, people used to sell out bigger stadiums, or as big of stadiums, before there was anything resembling
you
social
could have
media.
a selfie booth at the front where the background is the stage. And so then, but you just can't take a selfie in front of the actual stage.
We've thought about what Danny said, we should do it at one of our shows, but only let half the crowd have.
Yeah, that's what I want, to give half the crowd the bags, and the other half they get to keep their phone, like the Stanford prison experiment, just to see the total chaos that would break out.
So let's talk about some member berries. This week we were going to talk about a movie called Real Genius, which is a 80s comedy with Val Kilmer, and particularly the music from that movie, which you can't find either of these tracks on.
No, yeah, Chaz Jankel, you can.
Okay, you can't find the second one, right?
Real Genius is one of I think, the best movies from the 80s. It's one of those ones we had on VHS, and we probably watched it like 10, 20 times or something like that. It's got Val Kilmer's the lead, and, you know, he's a young genius, and then there's an even younger genius that comes to college at like 12 or 14 years old or something like that. Maybe 16, I don't know. But it's a classic 80s movie, and the soundtrack is amazing. I think one of our favorite tracks from that soundtrack, maybe it's purely associated, but I think it's a legitimately good song, is called Falling by a band called Comsat Angels. And it's not on iTunes or Spotify or anywhere. You got to find it on YouTube, which is kind of strange because I feel like it's such a big song. It should be one of those classic hits that's everywhere from the 80s. But
yeah, speaking of mixing, I love that mix. We're getting to the mixing stage. Just amazing sounding record. And then Chaz Jankel. Jeez, what a name.
It's Jankel, I think. Jankel with an A.
Jankel with an A.
Huh. Chaz Jankel.
We saw it in South Africa. It was called Genius Kids, right?
Yeah, Genius.
That's a member berry. They used to change names for South African movie releases because if it was too specific of a name, or they didn't think that South Africans would get it, they would change the name.
Encino Man
was California Man.
Was changed to California Man for South Africa, or probably for the rest of the world.
Right, because the nuance of California neighborhoods is not going to register with South Africans.
Goodfellas was called Baddies.
No, but that's funny. Goodfellas is on Netflix now, which is nice to be able to see it somewhere where you can watch it properly. Because you remember when they used to just show it on TV, like on TBS or whatever, and they'd have to,
movies,
they would have overdubbed every one of Joe Pesci saying, "I'm gonna fucking kill you, motherfucker, you."
Yeah,
and he'd be like, "I'm gonna."
Forget. It was always forget
you, man.
Once I think they used Fooey once. Like here's Joe Pesci's like just murdered somebody and he says Fooey.
Maybe they were taking the piss, like whoever was doing the overdubs.
Or if Joe Pesci had to do it himself, he's like, well,
you still could. Also, they couldn't stop watching
entire scenes from a movie. I remember Casino as well. Like a lot of Martin Scorsese movies, they just cut entire scenes where it would jump from one thing to the next.
Don't they cut the scene where they bury them in the desert? Something like that? Where
I can't remember.
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm not for censorship, but that end of Casino, they should censor that. It's way too violent. Yeah. It's like one of the most disturbing violent scenes ever. I still think,
like, people talk about Tarantino. I can't actually stand his movies, but Scorsese's violence is the most uncomfortable you can feel in a movie.
Yeah, it's so realistic. Yeah. What's it like to be in a band with your brothers? Cool. Let's move straight on to deep.
It just made me remember the There Will Be Blood. We watched it at Camelview. That just speaking of violence, how bizarre that thing was. We watched There Will Be Blood at this theater that doesn't exist anymore in Phoenix, and it's kind of it used to be the Arts Theater, so they would only show artsy movies, and it'd be a very specific crowd that went there, and most of the time they would be laughing inappropriate.
It's like the NPR crowd.
Yeah, it's like the NPR crowd. They go and watch these movies, and they laugh inappropriately at all these different moments. And the moment where he's beating the guy with the bowling pin.
The bowling pin.
They were laughing.
Right. No, it's pre when he starts beating him. It's when Daniel Day-Lewis, they're having the argument in the bowling alley. Is I drink your milkshake, you know, that famous scene. And then they were laughing throughout all of it. They couldn't really pick up on the tension that was building. And then he started to beat him with a bowling pin. And they just kind of all got quiet.
It was like halfway through the beating when they realized that he was going to be beaten to death. They were kind of like, ha ha ha. Oh,
this isn't a rom-com.
I think it's this need that people would go to that theater, and because they would play independent films or artsy films, they felt like they had to really get everything, you know, and they basically would interpret irony everywhere because that's what they thought they were supposed to do, because this is art, you know, this is not just going for entertainment. So they were trying to, you know, people would sit in the audience and try and find the angle, like, oh yeah, I get this, do you guys get it? I get it. And turns out they didn't get it.
Yeah, it was the same thing. I had that experience probably 99% of the time I went to that theater. It was really weird.
Yeah, it was very specific to that
Jack
theater.
Nicholson movie that we watched too. About Schmidt. It was like kind of amusing occasionally in that movie, but mostly it was quite a sad movie. And it was just constant laughter the whole time. Like they're in on the secret, you know, that the director was like, this is incredibly ironic and you guys are in on it.
I wonder if it's just that it's a deeper problem with them. They're just uncomfortable, and laughter is the way to deal with uncomfortable silence. I mean, people do it in conversation, you know, about every little thing that's just not necessary. And you see it at comedy clubs also. If someone's bombing, unless you're at the Comedy Store, where they will like eat you alive, but they'll give you these polite laughters for jokes that aren't that funny, and there's an increased amount of laughs at comedy clubs sometimes for jokes that are not that good, because everyone's like, oh, well, he said a joke, we should probably laugh. You know, just this uncomfortability factor.
Yeah, I think that's more understandable because the person's looking at you, but it's not like anybody on the movie screen can experience you, so there's no obligatory behavior necessary at a movie theater where, you know.
Yeah.
It's that mixed with this need to go to a movie and just tell the rest of the audience that you get it. You know, it's like making sure that everyone knows that this guy with the popcorn gets it.
Before I like a movie, I check the Rotten Tomatoes score.
Yeah, check to get my opinion. Yeah. Mick just walked into the lounge here, and what I think is funny is he probably took him like 10 minutes to figure out whether we were doing a podcast or just talking shit.
Basically avoiding the studio.
It wasn't what we like to be your brothers. It's your favorite gear of the week.
Okay, I've got one, which is the Moog Moogerfooger 104 delay, M delay. This one is M. They make these delays, and it's an analog delay, which for people who are into delays, it's much more intensive to make an analog delay, since, you know, so there's not that many that get made now. It's called a bucket brigade device, because in some sort of electrical terms, the analogy they drew was people passing buckets of water. So they use capacitors and stuff to store a signal and then delay it. Anyway, the point is, it's an awesome delay, and it's just amazing. It's got a really wicked drives section, and
delay, so it's like an echo.
Oh yeah, I mean, I'm assuming you're picking up on what I'm saying. Yeah, that's my favorite piece of gear in the studio right now.
Could you get more echo, please?
Now his last name is Moog, right?
Yeah,
but spelled Moog, but
said
pronounced
Moog.
That's very confusing.
Yeah, you'd know.
Moogerfooger sounds way better than Moogerfooger.
That reminds me of that.
Moogerfooger.
We did the overuse of delay or reverb or echo or whatever on either a gig or in a recording. You know, it's very easy to fall victim to it. But it reminds me of that band we did a gig with in London years ago in a little club in Soundcheck. They were one of those bands, you know, from East London that everything had to be sort of swimming in reverb. And the thing was so wet. It sounded like you were in a fucking tunnel, you know, like 100-yard long tunnel. Their whole band was going through reverb. And I just remember thinking, Jesus, this is a fucking mess. And that while they were playing the song, and then pause, the guy goes, could I get more reverb, please? And it's like... It sounds like you're fucking in a canyon and he's asking for more.
I don't know if it was a YouTube video or if it was Mick describing, that particular type of musician, which he has a funny acronym for. But I think it was Mick who was describing it to me. He's like, and he describes the whole thing like a glass of red wine, a loop pedal, an acoustic guitar sitting on a stool, and then he even acted it out. And this was before we saw this guy. He's acting this guy out, and he goes, "Can I have some more reverb, please?" And then he came on stage and he did exactly that. He had a glass of Chardonnay, or not Chardonnay, he had a glass of
Cab Sauv.
Yeah.
Mick, since you're in the room, why don't you come tell us your favorite Too Much Reverb story, if you have one, or any Too Much Reverb story. You're going to have to give you a microphone.
I don't even know if I can think of one right now. A Too Much Reverb story. That one was London.
Yeah, that was London.
2015, right? I think that was Richie Dempsey. It might have been me on the chat though, talking about it.
Okay.
But you guys were going to some guy over here. I'm like, hold on.
You might have sent us a YouTube link and we watched it and it happened exactly that way right afterwards in real life.
I mean, what's my Too Much Reverb story, man?
Have you ever mixed a band
Well, there's been. Yeah, absolutely. Where they've wanted just more and more and more. There's a couple of bands in Phoenix that were like that, actually. It was a whole phase, like about 4 or 5 years ago, there was a whole movement of bands that just wanted more and more and more reverb. They would come in with their vocal pedal. Oh, I must use this. Like, you can't hear anything. Hey, man, going to turn his vocal up? It's
I understand.
all reverb.
Yeah, it's like a comfort blanket, though, because without reverb, every little flaw is out there. When you put reverb on anything, you can have a really mediocre vocal. Trust me, I've done a lot of them. And you put the right amount of reverb, and it kind of covers over all the little errors or the little kind of weird breaths and weird tunings,
Oh, for sure. I mean, I love it. I use it a lot, but there are people that go a bit too far.
There was
one of the bands that went really far but wasn't too far was John Messenger's band in Phoenix. What's the name of them again? Oh, Snakes. His first album was just reverb to a million. But it sounded great because it was supposed to be that deep, trenchy thing. But if you're not going to commit and go for it, then it always just sounds a bit pasty to me.
Yeah, I get the appeal of it. It's that fine, arbitrary line when it crosses it. You're like, oh, that's just too much.
Well, if the XX can do it, we can do it.
It's kind of like the mod wheel on a keyboard. Because when I used to perform at school, in the jazz band and everything, I was soloing. I could pretend like I was a fucking brilliant keyboardist and soloing at the speed of light because I had this mod wheel on it, and so you didn't hear any flubs in between in scales and notes and all these wrong notes. It was just like,
oh, you mean portamento?
Yeah, portamento wheel. Yeah.
Well, it's the same thing when you watch guitar shredders online. You can tell a real shredder is when they pick up an acoustic guitar or an electric guitar just through an amp with nothing else, and they're able to play fast, and it's not covered in distortion and reverb.
Yes. Yeah,
But don't judge us if you hear the next album and there's a really reverby track. Don't think it's just because there's a bad vocal or something.
And don't make my life difficult, Mike.
Yeah, it was totally intentional and self-aware. So don't worry about it, guys. We got this.
All right, what's it like to be a band of brothers? Not going to talk
we
about
talked
that.
about delays and reverbs, and then we spent the whole time shitting on them. The Moogerfooger is really cool, and you cannot use too much of it.
So who's got some deep thoughts for the week?
Oof, I'm fucking out this week.
Hit pause.
Yeah.
Here, there's a deep thought for you. This need to feel deep about stuff, that we all have. Sometimes it's just not there. You just, you can go from day to day and actually not give a shit about the depth of the universe. And it's comforting to just ignore that side, even though it's there in the back of your mind, that you have to have these questions in your mind always, because they don't go away. You go away. So
I've got Cheeto dust all over my copy of the Bhagavad Gita.
Oh, well, I mean, I watched the Tony Robbins documentary the other night.
I've seen half of that, yeah.
Yeah. It's what it's called, I'm Not Your Guru.
I don't know. Yeah.
I thought it was fucking incredible documentary. It's like a real mix of eerie, creepy, moving, touching, like powerful, weird as hell.
It sounds like the quotes from like that you see on the movie poster.
Yeah,
I found it very bizarre.
Yeah, it was strange.
But anytime you see people in groups doing stuff like that, like so you know, when a performer or somebody does call and answer, like what's it called, Queen at Live Aid, doing Radio Gaga. I mean, it's amazing, but it also just gives you this weird sensation. It's quite a...
Yeah, it's funny. It's who tweeted? One of you guys tweeted from our Twitter account recently that you said, "Can we all just agree that groupthink is the worst?"
Yeah, that was me.
The irony of people agreeing with that, and but there is something we all fall into it. We all have like groups that we associate with or identify with, and that we feel comfortable with, and that we don't feel comfortable with other groups. But it is strange to see a room full of 6,000, or no, maybe it wasn't that many, 2,500 people clapping like they were with Tony Robbins. But at the same time, then, you know, the rest of the documentary has real kind of heart in it, and it's actually...
Well, I think you said that your initial reaction might have been to be like, oh, Tony Robbins, he's just that self-help guy, like, I'm not interested in it. But then you look at what he's accomplished, and you have to acknowledge that he's done something, and he's done a lot more, at least in the external world, than any of us have done or possibly could do. So you have to say, well, what's behind this? How is he able to gather this kind of force within himself to accomplish what he's accomplished?
Yeah, I mean, before watching it, I just knew of him as the self-help guru and kind of big old cheesy guy with like perfect teeth, and so I didn't really know much about him, but there's an undeniable presence that he has. And, you know, whatever his methods are that he's using to help people, it seems like his intentions are pure. He also wants $5 billion, but I think, you know, I get the sense that he truly does want to help people.
It's a weird thing, though, because when you've been on a stage, like, I did this once for the first time in Sao Paulo at Lollapalooza. Like, you know, often I lead crowds in a clap on It's a Good Life or something, but I had never done it before on Take It From Me. And because the crowd was so responsive, I thought, like, okay, I could easily get this crowd to go with me on a different kind of clap. So I did this halftime clap at Lollapalooza, kind of like timidly. I was like, I don't know, is everyone going to go with this? And 15,000 people literally started clapping as I started clapping. And that's a weird moment when you feel this kind of like power rush, which you could see how, like, I just did it because I thought it'd be fun and everyone would enjoy it. But if I did that 10 or 11 more times, you can see how that power might start to corrupt any impetus that you had.
You might want to make people clap all around the world, even when they shouldn't be clapping.
Yeah. So I'm just saying, like, someone like Tony Robbins, yeah, he does seem to have some honest attempt. He's trying to improve the world, help people's lives. But I wonder where that line gets reached in him, of where it becomes this, just keep feeding this need to get material and or like emotional feedback.
That's a deep thought. You're trying to get basically to what is the source of motivation, or if there is such a thing outside of if there is such a thing, basic, you know, you're back to your whole subjective thing again.
Hey, I didn't say it.
I was preempting that, but yeah, there's something contagious about anybody's state. You know, it doesn't matter what state you're in. It's contagious to a degree. And you can be negative, you know. You can feel sometimes when you're in a really, really bad mood, and it's heavy, and you walk into a room, you can feel it basically fall onto the room, or the opposite, you know. So
it's like, you know, when people do an animation of what, you know, heating up some matter looks like, you know, under a microscope or at the atomic level. How it spreads, how an atom starts to jiggle, you know, when the temperature increases, and then the next ones next to it start to jiggle, and it's this effect. And I don't think that we're any different than those molecules or those microcosms of our cells, and that we have that sort of radiance, you know, without getting too yoga on you. Like, you know, you do have some sort of field around you that is contagious, and it interacts with other people's fields, and you can feel that sort of exchange. It's very easy in the sense of a band on stage where there's this clearly this energy exchange going on. You know, everyone accepts that, and even scientists, you know, who want proof and are skeptics about everything will go to a rock concert and be like, yeah, there's definitely an energy exchange here.
Yeah, well, they always say there's no human pheromones, But that's a kind of misnomer, I think, because a pheromone just means that it's a species-specific chemical that conveys, information. But there are chemicals which convey information. Obviously, there must be. I mean, we're animals.
So, but if you get someone like Tony Robbins who's able to understand this, the ability to influence a crowd is something you can learn or become better at, perhaps. Maybe some people naturally have it. But then you also see throughout history the people that have learned that and used it for entirely negative reasons, to drum up a war or something like that. So...
Let's cut this deep thought short because we have one of our editors just came in and we are going to be working on Bus Call. So that's moving along. We're very excited of what we have to show you. And we're going to use this 45-minute podcast to end it with saying, get excited because we've got some
Can
good
I
shit
give that
coming.
one elephant pheromone anecdote?
Sorry, yes, continue.
So when we were on the game drives in South Africa, this is not really related to the Tony Robbins thing, but somebody was telling us, I think Wiseman, one of the guys, was telling us that the elephants eat the shrubs and stuff, and they march upwind. They go upwind because the shrubs release a pheromone when they get eaten that then, if the other plants receive it, they start making bitter tannins. So the elephants also figured this out, and they march upwind so that the pheromones get blown the opposite direction, so they get to eat nice sweet shrubs instead of tannin-filled shrubs.
So it's a defense mechanism the other plants have that, like, they send out a warning saying, hey, we're getting eaten over here. Turn yourselves into bitter.
Yeah,
bitter greens.
I thought that was pretty fascinating. Like, there's plant pheromones are. The level of communication, it just is pretty.
That's why you vegans have got blood on your hands as well.
All right. Until next time.
Check us out at kongos.com/podcast. We usually throw up links from everything that we're talking about. There's some good music on there on this one, so go check it out.
Twitter/Coldplay.
Bye.